that. We try to leverage that kind of buying power. It works sometimes. The example I gave you of Springer is one of those cases where that is a consortial negotiated deal. It's just getting beyond our means. The University of Texas will continue to be able to subscribe, I suspect, but our collection budget hasn't grown in 8 years. On the other hand, we haven't been cut. They have kept the collection budget at KU. They've held it harmless from budget cuts. Our operations budget is being cut just like every other unit on campus, but our collection budget has neither been cut nor grown in 8 years. The result, however, is that we lose about $500,000 in buying power every year. Yes, sir?
Well, you may be getting this, but I have a 16-year-old granddaughter who's my tech consultant. When my computer crashes, she solves my problems. But because of my academic career, she often uses me when she's wanting to write a paper.
Sure.
So we will sit down and I will help her with that. And the struggle we both have is that the internet contains so much trash. And so I have told her, she's been doing this for the last, and she did this last year, is that when she needs information, what she needs to do is find an open access library. KU, where she's used libraries all over the country. Access their collection and use it like a Google. Does that make sense?
Oh, it absolutely makes sense. I think it's a very good idea. It at least is a good starting place.
Well, she stays, yeah, what happens is that she stays off of Google, stays off of all those search stuff, gets into the library, finds a couple key things, gets into the footnotes, and then she may track Google, but she's got something that she can track Google with.
Right.
As opposed to just going in and going like this, which gets you a lot of crap.
Right, and that your granddaughter is extremely fortunate to have pointed in that direction.
I'm the lucky one.
Well, it sounds like a good trade-off. You have a mutually beneficial relationship. I think that's great. So yeah, no, my next point is about open access, but it's a combination of, I think, both our efforts between digitizing our unique and distinctive materials and trying to improve the environment for access to scholarship overall. Those are both really ways in which we're trying to make Google better, because it is still what most people do, including, by the way, most scholars.
Yes.
In surveys say that they begin their research either with Google or with Google Scholar. So you're right, starting at a better starting point is a great idea. It's just, I think, that not everybody is going to do it. So the last point I want to make is about how do we spend our money. First of all, I want to make the pitch that maybe I don't need to make for the value of open access. For policies like the one at KU, which gives the university a license to put some version, sometimes it's an earlier version of an article, into an open repository. KU Scholar Works, when I was at Duke, it was called Duke Space. Everybody has their own name. But to create those kinds of online libraries of the scholarship that is created at a particular institution. That is a huge benefit, not just to Dennis's granddaughter, but to lots and lots of people, including those scholars in the developing world. That's what's making it possible for more and more people, whether they're scholars in the developing world or whether they're Jack Andretti. It's what's making it possible for them to do research that would otherwise be beyond them. So that's part of the solution, and I am passionate about open access, and we'll talk to you about it for hours if you let me. Don't let me. But the other part of that is that libraries need to figure out better ways to spend our money. And what I mean about that is that in a technologically shifted age, when it's no longer stamping ink on paper, binding it, storing it, shipping it, when those expenses no longer exist, we need to look at ways that we can spend our money to support the production of scholarship rather than simply consuming its end products. The production of scholarship is taking a great variety of forms. The open access repository for journal articles is a good step, but supporting the production, whether it's an online journal that's we manage the technology for 27 journals in the KU libraries now. I'm on the editorial board of one of those that came here with me. It was somewhere else and it moved here when I came here. It's called the Journal of Copyright Education in Libraries, JCEL, yes. But we have a wide variety of journals where we actually support the production. The same volunteer editors and volunteer peer reviewers do their work, and the results are made openly accessible on websites that we manage so that anybody can get access to them. We're spending our money on the production instead of consumption. We're doing that when we work on the database of the transatlantic slave trade or Project Vox. Those are ways we can invest in the production of scholarship rather than merely its consumption. This works pretty well in a lot of fields. It works very well in the sciences, where increasingly scientists are getting used to using what are called preprint versions of articles that are in databases. It doesn't work as well in the humanities, where a monograph is still considered the gold standard. But we're looking at that. There are even models for underwriting the production of monographs. There's a project called Knowledge Unlatched, where libraries are asked to make commitments. They're usually smaller commitments than it would be if we bought all the titles individually. Commitments to a project. They pull together a group of books. It tends to be between 30 and 50 titles at a time, working with different publishers. The publishers tell them how much they need to justify participating in this project, how much the cost of producing this monograph was, more or less. And they pool that money. They ask people to contribute a set amount. As I say, it's usually less than buying them title by title. And assuming 200 libraries participate, this is the price. 300 libraries participate, the price is a little bit lower. And ultimately, all of those books are made accessible to the world. Though it's a drop in the bucket, but it's an indication of the direction that the publication of scholarly monographs is going. All of this is to say that we are in a complex and complicated world that is growing more complicated. And when I said librarians are not going away, our work is actually getting much more complicated than it was. We are making a transition from being consumers of scholarship to being partners in its creation and dissemination. I like to tell my librarians that all of the things that I've mentioned, increasing access to scholarship, overcoming an outmoded economic model, improving information literacy, and making the digital environment a richer place for scholarship, all of those things involve breaking down barriers between students of all ages and the information that they need. That has always been our fundamental job, to break down barriers to access to learning. And it is still the fundamental role of the research library. The way we're doing that has changed over time, but that fundamental mission is what we have always done and still what we're trying to do. And I'll stop and take questions if you have any. Yes, sir.
When you put research and libraries together, historically, the thing that comes to my mind is the House of Wisdom. Are you familiar with that?
The House of Wisdom. Tell me more.
What?
Tell me more.
Well, it was in Baghdad for 500 years. It was a center of both storage of information, the use of development. Grandson of, well, it was wiped out.
Yes.
All the people who were involved in that sort of thing, not just the House of Wisdom, but other things, your blood ran down to
Well, I like the House of Wisdom as an analogy for the research library. I'm not sure I like the fate. I hope that's not in the future of libraries, but of course, the great libraries of the ancient world all got destroyed one way and another. Alexandria was burned, and Pergamum was reduced to rubble. Whatever happened, there's no library there. Ephesus is just a shell. The House of Wisdom is gone, but we keep trying the same idea, so I think we have to realize that there's something fundamental about human nature that wants to do what libraries do. Yes, sir.
Is traffic in the library less than it used to be?
Yes.
So students are at home on their computers, doing their research papers in their rooms without the need to go to the library for a hard copy of something.
We still have about 2 million visits to the library every
Oh.
year. So it's not down to a negligible amount.
What did it used to be?
4.
Oh my.
So it's about in half, and that's not unusual for our colleagues. It's sort of stable at this point at about 2 million visits a year. And I did, in the 10 years that I was at Duke, they made huge changes in the physical plan of their libraries to try and accommodate more the way students study today. And they were managing to push their foot traffic back up. I don't think it will ever be where it was when I was a student or when you were. But there are ways that the library is still an attractive place for lots of students, and there are ways we can make it more
Are
attractive.
students using librarians differently today?
I think so. We no longer have professional librarians on the research desk, the reference desk.
Oh,
They are unclassified professional staff, paraprofessionals as we called them in libraries for a long time, because we realized how much of their job was basically directing traffic, and that they could do a lot to help the student who's, I'm looking for 3 articles on, gosh, I can't think of the topic right now, but
right.
that's not very hard to do. Our paraprofessional staff are wonderful. They can do that with a student. They can identify situations where a research consultation is needed. And we have an online system to request a research consultation. It will be assigned to a librarian who's a specialist in helping in that area, and they'll meet with the student for a long-term consultation. So we're doing some triage there, and so yes, that does mean that students interact differently with our librarians.
Interesting.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I've got a public library background, and I think it's only been recently that I've come to realize that a lot of the issues and problems are really parallel. For some reason, I thought the academic library was safer, and I'm a user. I'm no longer a student, but I've got a resident borrower
Sure.
card, and I mean, I've even seen some of the browsing collection disappeared, and
Right.
and this notion of outsourcing and loss of control of the information. What I keep coming back to is, I think it's what you're talking about, is you've got to strike this balance. I mean, the allure of the online stuff is just real easy
Oh, yeah.
to turn it over,
Yep.
and I even have noticed you almost need to evaluate some of these online databases. I worked at a public library in Kansas City, one of the large county systems, and some of the original online databases, like we had one that was health specific, you could get JAMA articles out of it. I mean, stuff that you almost had trouble understanding, for the lay person. And as things evolved, those disappeared, and they started referring you to things like PubMed, which,
Right.
good luck finding
Right.
anything other than glorified advertising. So I guess I see the balance need. I guess too, when you said which is going to last longer, Google or libraries, that's a good question, but this is where I trust the library keep the information accessible.
Right.
When I was working at the library, I don't remember this time, late 90s, when Google was talking about digitizing all this stuff that it was no longer under copyright.
Well,
and
they
were
digitized a whole lot of in-copyright stuff too.
and they were going to try to,
Oh.
and they were saying, we're going to make this accessible. Well, that's today. What about
Well,
tomorrow?
that's a great question.
And so, yeah, the public university, at least I'm more trusting, even
Right.
though it's becoming more and more influenced by private interests.
Couple things I want to say about that. One is that Google digitized over 12 million volumes in their Google Libraries project. University of Michigan, University of Wisconsin, Cornell, a number of libraries contributed books. They digitized a whole lot of stuff without regard for whether or not it was protected by copyright.
Yeah, that's right.
However, what's available publicly is either public domain material or what they call snippets of the copyrighted works, so that you can see, if you search a word, you can see it in context. The goal is to push you towards a library or some such source for the in-copyright books. There has been a lawsuit against Google about whether or not that is copyright infringement. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals ruled 2 years ago that it was not. That was a fair use of copyrighted material, even for 12 million books. And the Supreme Court denied a hearing. They denied cert in the case. So that's pretty much a settled conclusion. The libraries took those digital copies that they were given back from Google and created a nonprofit entity called the Hathi Trust. Hathi is the Sanskrit word for elephant. The Hathi Trust has most of those 12 million volumes and has been working on a project to make more and more of them accessible, either by working with rights holders, publishers, or authors to get permission, or by identifying a larger number of public domain works. The public domain in the United States is very complex, and they've had a multi-year project to identify books that are in the public domain and therefore can be shared openly. So I think we've gotten a tremendous benefit, and Hathi was also sued by the same plaintiffs, and the Second Circuit Court of Appeals said that it too was fair use, or at least using copyrighted works responsibly. So that's the first point. About PubMed, I wanted to point out that the government is now beginning to mandate open access for research products that are the product of federally funded work. And the NIH led the way in this. The NIH is the largest scientific funder in America. And there is a parallel database called PubMed Central, which is free to the public. And has much more information than PubMed does. PubMed, you get a certain amount unless you subscribe. PubMed Central is free to the public, and the Obama administration has ordered all federal funding agencies that fund research at a level of $100 million or more to follow their example and find ways to make this research publicly accessible as a matter of taxpayer accountability. Taxpayers are paying for this research. The argument is they deserve to have access to it. Third thing I wanted to say about your point was just to remind you that we have always, throughout history, there have been folks who believed the latest technological development was going to send us to hell in a handbasket. So you can look this up. In his 12th letter, Plato predicts that this new technology called writing will demolish the human memory. John Philip Sousa lobbied Congress to put strict controls on the new technology of radio, or I think it was the phonograph actually, because it would undermine the tradition of people singing together. The actual history is that technologies have always coexisted. I don't think the book is going to go anywhere soon. I would still rather curl up with a book than with my iPad.
Amen.
But there are tremendous possibilities offered by the online environment as well. So I think we make a mistake if we either cling religiously to the book or jump entirely to the online environment. Yes, sir?
And if anyone's interested in it, you've got a thesis in your library on that topic that's very in-depth and really interesting. The telephone was also
That's
one.
right.
People won't meet face-to-face anymore once they can use a telephone.
Are you the author of that thesis?
I am not.
Oh, okay.
I don't think anything as massive and dry as that book, but it's really interesting.
Kevin, it's time, maybe
Yeah.
we can close and you can take a couple of questions kind of informally. Thank you so much for being here. We
It's been
appreciate
a
it.
pleasure.
Great
Thank you
job.
very much.